When is the last time you thought about the movie Shark Tale? When you think of Shark Tale, I am sure everybody is picturing that little, what was he? He was like a shrimp.
My sister had a baby, and I took over after she passed away, and the baby lost all of its legs and arms, and now it's just a stump. But I take care of it with my wife, and it's growing, and it's really happy, and it's difficult because I'm working a second shift at the factory to put food on the table. But all the love that I see in the little guy's face makes it worthwhile in the end. True story.
All right, that was ridiculous. Okay, anyways, moving on, because that actually has nothing to do with what I wanted to speak about today. When I'm talking about Shark Tale, okay, I want everyone to think about what the lesson of Shark Tale is. Because I was like, wait a second. As I'm trying to remember, the last time I watched Shark Tale was I was a child, probably, maybe a teenager. Okay, that's been some time. That's been some time ago. And I am going, wait a second. I have a hypothesis that Shark Tale is really telling the tale of how the patriarchy and this ideal, the status quo of masculinity, is pushed upon men and harms them because of that. Is everyone gathering what I'm speaking about? Because what I remember is that Oscar wanted to be at the penthouse in the top of the reef, and he got there, and it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, and that's kind of the lesson he learns, right? And I remember the shark, and I remember he was a vegetarian, and he wasn't fitting the mold that his mobster shark father wanted him to fit. And so I'm going, wait a second. We are actually saying so much in Shark Tale. And that is the beauty of going back to the movies from your childhood because, especially the ones from when I was a kid, like, they were saying actually a fucking lot if you pay attention. And one thing I say on my page all the time is do not stick to the status quo because I cover the wonderful movie that is High School Musical all the time and the lessons that we can take from High School Musical and the status quo. How does the status quo harm people? These are although it's not spoken about explicitly and stated like High School Musical, the status quo, we see this throughout so many movies from the early 2000s childhood. So today I wanted to take you through the story of Shark Tale and the lessons we are learning. And honestly, if there are red-pilled men on the internet, as we know there are, I honestly believe that they should all be watching Shark Tale. Okay, because there is much more to learn based on Shark Tale. Like, honestly, we could have elaborated more, but like we only got so much time. It's an hour and a half kids movie. And we will get to my little gripes in the storyline at the end of the video, but I particularly want to speak about how the patriarchy affects everything. Okay. And not just from Oscar's story, not just from Lenny the shark story, but also from Angie's story. Okay. And that is going to be my gripe with Shark Tale. We'll get to it when we get to it. But at the end of the day, the patriarchy shapes how people view themselves and what is the status quo that people feel they need to conform to. And when you base the status quo, right, the status quo patriarchy, right, what are these things that we are conforming to? What are the beliefs that, from a young age that we are forced to conform to? And how does that develop as we get older into how we think about ourselves and others. That's why I always bring up High School Musical because it truly is a story of how they want a boy to stick to the status quo, and when he stops doing that, what happens? And this particular story is very interesting because I think it reflects on more of how the characters feel and the lengths they are willing to go in attempt to protect themselves whilst they are simultaneously suffering from the pressures of the status quo patriarchy, right? And the status quo of what they believe masculinity should look like and what should a man aspire to be and be like. So we lay the groundwork with we know Oscar, he's a little fish. He has always dreamed of living at the penthouse at the top of the reef. We see this a lot in the way that Oscar is often trying these get rich quick schemes in order to, right? How do we be quick? How do we become the entrepreneur, right? Like, how do a lot of these like red pill tactics, right? About, working for yourself and trying to do the next thing to get money, like how does that pipeline go to the red pill pipeline on what they view masculinity to be? And that's interesting thing about Shark Tale in particular because we see and we'll get to in the story, Oscar and Lenny work together. Like they don't judge each other in the way, like they don't force each other to conform. They're just like, we've got our own thing and we can benefit from, I don't know, like working with each other to play this off, which is very interesting. And that's a lesson we learn at the end of the movie. So this is a particular interesting fact from that, right? In the way that like they weren't friends and got the courage by breaking free together. It was just like they were both suffering simultaneously together. And at the end, they learned a real lesson. Because Oscar has been doing these get rich quick schemes, he is owing a lot of money to his boss, quite frankly, right? Because he works at the whale wash, in case anyone forgot. The big thing is he owes his boss all this money. First, Oscar gets a warning. His boss lets the jellyfish beat him up. Oscar goes to a coworker and also friend, Angie, from the whale wash and goes over to her place. And she's obviously very concerned. She is seeing a friend who is getting beat up and threatened if he does not pay the money back. And Angie is very concerned for him because one thing you need to know is that Angie also does have a crush on Oscar, okay? So I do feel like this really affects her storyline. And like I said, we will get to it when we get to it, but I have a lot to say regarding that as well. We are laying the groundwork in Shark Tale to how does Oscar feel about himself? What about the status quo of patriarchy? Right? And I say in a very stereotypical way because there are so many things now. I think obviously there are a lot of progressive people now as much as our country is going downhill, right? But like we still are aware of these red pill talking points that almost seem so absurd, but unfortunately, like they do seep into so many different thinking patterns in the way the patriarchy is still upheld to this day, even if they seem far fetched to you now. When we think of patriarchy, right, we are thinking of big money, we are thinking of status, recognition, hot women, right? Like that is I would say the very stereotypical view of patriarchy. And of course, there's many more aspects to it, but like this is what we see a lot from Oscar. And I don't really think we see disrespect at this point to Angie. We will get there though. And I won't get into maybe some of the emotional labor that Angie was doing for Oscar, but that's honestly, I haven't even tackled that in my analysis yet, but that's certainly part of it. We won't get on that today, but we're going to tackle Angie's storyline, don't get me wrong. When we look up how Oscar is really feeling about himself, right? How does the patriarchy affect not just what we view success to be in our life, right? Oscar was striving towards how do I get to be on the top of the reef? Like, right? How do I become a millionaire? How do I get the money to buy myself into that, right? And then when I get there, I'll finally feel like somebody. We get this dialogue when he goes over to Angie's house. I'm a little fish in a big pond. I'm a nobody. I want to see some of that, the top of the reef, where the somebodies live. I want to be rich and famous like them, but I'm stuck down here. As I've said, right? A very stereotypical basis, like maybe when I have enough money, I'll feel worth something, right? Where I have this recognition, where I'm liked by people, I'll feel worth something, right? This whole kind of thing. Like Angie, she's like a genuine friend to Oscar. Like I said, like she also does have a crush on him. But like, right, like she is like, what's wrong with down here? I'll tell you what's wrong with down here. Remember my dad? He worked at the wash his whole life. He was the number one tongue scrubber. Every year for 25 years. To me, working at the wash was the coolest job in the ocean. But then I learned something I will never forget. And here we get a flashback to when Oscar was a kid. And he was such a proud kid and wanted to showcase like how cool he thought his father was. But unfortunately, we are seeing the class laugh at him for saying that his father was a tongue scrubber, right? So he is not only being laughed at for quote unquote, his father having a poor man's job, right? We are noticing a lot of things here, right? Like, what is the right kind of job for a man to have? And right, we're also talking about class in here as well. There's many things that I think Shark Tale touches on that we won't exactly get today because today I'm mostly talking about patriarchy, right? But that's certainly in there, right? How do we view people who have jobs like a tongue scrubber, right? And how those jobs aren't valued, and why is that? But Oscar has that flashback, so proud to talk about his father. The kids are laughing at him, and it was then that he, right? Like, if we're like going back to like, if Oscar was sitting in front of the therapist and was really to go, what experience in my life was a trajectory to me, part of the reason that he got to this part, right? It would be this instance that he faced in school, right? Feeling like, oh, I'm not going to be worth something. People aren't going to like me. They're going to laugh at me until I have XYZ, right? And it's one of those things, it's like, how do you kind of be like, wow, I love my dad, but everybody else is laughing at him, right? Like it contradicts that in a way. Oscar says, my dad was the greatest, but nobody loves a nobody. Angie says, Oscar, you don't have to live at the top of the reef to be a somebody. Okay. 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 This is such a fucking telling scene that lays the groundwork for the rest of the movie. 100%. Okay. For anyone wondering, I wrote about this in a composition notebook, like I'm in school, like I'm in middle school writing in a writer's notebook, because there's something, guys, write stuff down. Write stuff down. If I've learned anything, is that I still don't know how to spell. I'd be like, I'm pretty smart in other ways. Can I still spell? No. No. I feel like I just finally really felt strong about like spelling definitely. Am I gonna spell it for you now? No. I don't desire to be humiliated. But the thing about like Google when you're typing, right, on Microsoft, it's auto correcting for you, right? So like when do you really sit down and be like, I spelled that word wrong? And sometimes you have those vibes where you're like, I'm spelling this wrong, and you look it up and you're spelling it right. Nevertheless, I'm not a good speller. But I do think we should really get back to tactile. Like write things down, guys. Like we gotta get back to that. We gotta look back. We gotta go back to our childhood in a way, for many reasons. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. I just wanted to mention that. Also, if you're watching, my mic is on a Mingy photo card. Mingy is from the group ATs, in case anyone was wondering. We just needed to get that out there. So the thing about the patriarchy, right? It tells you who you should be, what you have to do to fit that mold, and what you have to do to gain that respect, right? I speak a lot about this, as I've said, about High School Musical, right? When we talk about white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, like we are covering today, these are all three systems that work within each other, to really uphold a certain standard. What are these things rooted in at the end of the day, right? And if we set that standard, where does that leave us in how we think of other people, but also, in particularly this movie, how do we think about ourselves and the goals that we want to reach? And are we worth something? Because Oscar is very clearly dealing with self worth here, right? Until he achieves these things, he will not feel worthy, despite the fact that he does have someone, Angie, who does like him the way he is. But Oscar very clearly feels like he won't feel successful, and also he doesn't feel like he has people that like him, even though he does. He has Angie, until he reaches these goals, right? And that's why he keeps fucking up. And the thing about Oscar is that he's gonna continue to fuck up. And that's the movie, but that's the point of it, and that's the fun of it. So Angie ends up giving Oscar her grandmother's pearl. She's like, listen, I don't want you hurt anymore. Take the pearl, get the money, give it to the boss, okay? And be good. Call it good, okay? Now, Angie, my darling, my darling. I know you like this boy. You don't want to see him hurt. But no, no, no. So Oscar owes in American money about $5,000. Okay, I'm just saying. I don't know the exact you know exchange rate, but I would say about $5,000. Okay, 5K. And okay, like Angie, I just don't think she should have given him the pearl. Nevertheless, it didn't solve the problem either way. And we'll get to that in a second. I just don't believe, we can't save people, right? And that's something that we'll get into later as we explore Angie's story more. Um, don't save the men. Okay, you can't. Oh, the thing of patriarchy, right? Wants women to feel like if they could save the men if they only did XYZ. That's something to note. Like I said, we'll get to later. Oscar, okay, takes the pearl, gets the money. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. Has to deliver it to Sykes, his boss, at the racetrack, okay? The seahorse racetrack, okay? There he meets, which, other than the shrimp, there is one other character that I'm sure everyone recalls, okay? And that is the notorious hot fish that is played by Angelina Jolie. Her name is Lola, okay? And she's going around Oscar. She's like, I could like you, but you're not a millionaire. Like, this is also really funny. In the realm of the patriarchy of it all, because I feel like right, there's this idea that like because men should be the breadwinners, there's all these women like seeking out the millionaires, right? It's just a funny thing to note. But that is essentially Lola's part in this story, right? She's like, nope, I'm sorry, you're not a millionaire. I could never like you, but maybe if you had money, right? Maybe if you had money. So Oscar is like, well, she was pretty hot. Maybe I can get her attention as well. He overhears the people at the box office where they gamble for the seahorses, right? This is equivalent to a horse race. He is a shoo-in. If you bid on Lucky Day, you'd be a millionaire. So, do you think that Oscar goes to deliver the money to Sykes to call it good? No, of course we got a movie to go here. We've got plot to happen here for the rest of the movie to go on. He bets all of his money, and all of Angie's money actually, on the seahorse race. And they're like, well, you better fucking win this then. Do you think his seahorse wins? No. No, his seahorse does not win. Could you? Hey, who would have thunk that? And of course, what happens? He's gonna get a beating once again. So this time, Oscar is tied up by kelp, getting a beating. Boom, sharks in the background. Simultaneously, we are learning about Lenny, our vegetarian shark, right? And the whole thing is that he is a vegetarian. It can't be this aggressive shark, and his dad is basically the shark mob boss, Don Lino. He has his brother Frankie, who is gonna try to teach him the ropes, right? Because eventually his dad wants the sons to take over the business. And there's something about Lenny that he is just not. He's not fitting the stereotype, right, of the sharks. You need to be aggressive, right? You need to not be afraid. And Lenny, he's kind and gentle. He doesn't want to hurt a soul, but his, brother Frankie is going to try to teach him the ropes, and that's why they are here when Oscar is wrapped up in the kelp. And I do want to note, I do think it is disrespectful. Who's going to argue with me? That Oscar would gamble the fucking money that Angie gave him. Come on, come on. And this is why I say when we get to the end of the movie, I'm gonna have more to say on that. I just wanted to note that because I realized I forgot to mention that. Okay, so now we have Lenny. He's playing it safe. He's trying to tell Oscar, like, I don't really want to kill you. Like, can you escape or something, right? And I'm just gonna pretend I ate you. And that is not the case. Lenny was pretending, and Frankie comes in, is about to get Oscar. Boom! Hit by an anchor. Dead. Dead. If you really think about this scene, it is kind of funny because obviously we weren't going to play this out as a children's movie, but like, that is kind of traumatizing for Lenny. Like, his brother was just killed by an anchor, mind you. But this interesting exchange goes where obviously Lenny, he's like, oh my gosh, my brother just died, right? Oscar's like, sick. Like, I get out of this, right? Because I'm no longer shark meat. Shark meat? He wouldn't be shark meat. A shark meal, rather. Lenny is obviously not gonna fucking kill him, right? So what happens is the jellyfish guys come back and they think, oh shit, Oscar just took out a shark. We're not gonna mess with him, right? So he's like, okay, I can kind of get out of this. So Oscar is basically kind of making a deal with Lenny, like, Lenny doesn't feel like he belongs, right? So Lenny was going to come back with Oscar, disguise himself as a dolphin, and we will touch on that later, to work at the whale wash, right? And Oscar said, wait a second, if everyone thinks I took out this shark, they're not going to come for me for the money, right? Like, no, obviously I just said like, "Ooh, you think you can beat me up?" No, 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 I'm more of a threat than you think, right? So he is now going to be coined as the Shark Slayer, okay? And he is by no means a Buffy Summers of the Sea. He is a fake, a phony, if you will, okay? And here's the thing. Random. Oscar starts getting all these sponsorships, right? He starts getting that money, that money, and guess what? He gets the penthouse at the top of the reef. He gets Lola Angelina Jolie Hotfish, right? And he's not feeling successful with this, right? But he gets the fame, the fortune, right? The attention that he has always felt like once I have this, I will finally feel good, right? And for Lenny, he is like, I need to hide, right? Like, I can't go back, like, especially not with his brother gone, right? He doesn't want to go back to his father, right? Because he's like, I don't even fit in here, right? This isn't right. And at least I kind of made a new fish friend, right? So Oscar is hiding Lenny out until he decides he wanted to transform as a dolphin, to work at the whale wash, which we'll get there, trust me. But I want to talk more about Oscar's stories, particularly because we get Angie, she's invited over to Oscar's penthouse, and Oscar does give her a necklace that happens to have the grandmother's pearl on the necklace. So, as I stated, disrespectful of him to cash that money, and I don't believe she should have given to him, but it is what it is. And then, boom, gamble it and be screwed. She did get it back at least, and that's a little bit, only a smidgen of credit that I will give to Oscar personally. Okay, only a smidgen. And one thing we notice here is like obviously Angie is like, you are not the same, right? Like, no, like you know what I mean? Like you are recognizing that. And also Oscar like does low key like Angie as well. But the thing is Lola is clocking this, right? Like she is looking at Angie like she's nobody, right? Like you are somebody. Like me. Hello. I am the star of the show. You are the millionaire that I want, right? And the thing about Oscar is he's got all the fame and fortune, right? And what does he not feel? He doesn't feel successful. He still doesn't feel good about himself, right? This lie that once you achieve these made up goals or do these things that fit this mold, you will finally feel secure within yourself. And he gets to that point where he has all these things that he wanted, right, at the beginning of the movie. And guess what? He doesn't fucking feel that way. Duh, because it's a lie. Because it's not real. Because it's not real. And this is the thing of patriarchy, right? You think about the ways in which people are robbed of how they feel about themselves, the better relationships they could had if they were not so obsessed with trying to hit these marks, right? And falling to the status quo, right? High School Musical of it all. So often I say, who are you performing for? Who are you performing for? Because you're not happy at the end of the day, right? Whether people have realized that or not, right? Like, who are you performing for? And I think so often in patriarchy, which I don't feel like necessarily we tackle in this movie, it's more of a like how you feel about yourself kind of movie rather than tackling what I'm going to speak about now. But it is just like the thing, how do people upkeep the status quo, right? Is that we're performing for what? Who? The other men or the people who are subscribing to the patriarchy for what? Like none of this actually serves us at the end of the day. Whilst like obviously there are privileges, people have their privileges within these systems, right? Like at the end of the day, like it does harm everybody. And we see this through Oscar's storyline. So Lola's reaction to Oscar being hung up on Angie was that she was gonna say, hey, I know you're the shark slayer, right? Like you have all this status now and I wanted to be with you. You have the status, you have the money. You don't want me. I'm mad at that. I'm gonna go tell the mob boss who's looking for who killed his son who you are, right? And that puts people in more trouble. But we need to get to Lenny's storyline in all of this, okay? So, as we know, performing masculinity, right? This idea of upholding all of these, the status quo patriarchy, right? Who are we performing for? We are performing for other people to view us a certain way. And when we don't want to stick to the status quo, how are we viewed, right? It is either a big thing, right? Like in High School Musical, everybody freaks out and tries to place people back to the status quo, or in small ways in which we're like, no, that's not you. Like we can train you into doing what is the norm, right? And that's kind of Lenny's story, right? That he did not fit these molds of this aggressive shark, right? And he's just this vegetarian and he's kind and he's a sweetie pie. And he's a sweetie pie. No, Lenny was a sweetie pie, okay? I stand by Lenny 100%. And you know, we talked about Oscar's self-worth in that like he didn't feel like he would be somebody. Then he got all the things that he thought he needed to feel like somebody and he still doesn't feel that way, right? For Lenny, this is almost kind of, a metaphor for maybe coming out and being gay, right? Because and I'm sure it could be many things, but just kind of like I don't fit this mold that you want me to fit, or I don't do the same thing that you would want me to do, right? That is stereotypical known of men to do, right? And so when I don't fit this mold, right? Because under patriarchy, right? It's also important to note what happens is when people are deemed not these patriarchal standards, right? Um, things that are deemed girly, quote unquote, like how are people viewed, right? So being a vegetarian, not being aggressive to, you know, shark eat shark world out there, right? He's just kind, right? Like he maybe embodies things that are seen as more quote unquote feminine. As we know, those are not actually exclusively feminine traits. I don't even like saying masculine feminine because we can't even get into it, but things that are prescribed that way, right? And why do we see why is one ascribed to one and not the other? The patriarchy. He doesn't fit this mold and he's going to do something different. So, one of the things Lenny does as he wants to escape the father because he just really doesn't feel like he fits in. His father is trying to make him be into someone he doesn't want to be, and he can't pretend anymore, right? It's the pressure of like, I can't perform for you anymore. I'm not gonna be like that. And you don't accept me as I am, right? So Oscar, like I said, they're both struggling with their own forms of performing for the patriarchy in some way that affects like them personally. But really enough, like they're really kind of helping each other. Like, how do I get you out of this, right? And one of the ways they do this is Lenny wants to fake his death, and Oscar is now being asked to perform as the Shark Slayer, right? Because the Reef thinks, oh, we are always living in fear of Don Lino and the sharks. Who's going to protect us? So Oscar has to now uphold this fake, ideal that he is a shark slayer. And simultaneously, Lenny wants to fake his own death. And Don Lino obviously cares about his son Frankie, thinks that this, fish did actually kill him and wants to come after him. So, like, what do we do to make sure that Lenny can fake his death so he can live peacefully with other people and simultaneously say that Oscar is strong, don't come after me because I am the Shark Slayer, right? They are going to stage a fight, right? And Angie knows that none of this is right. And she's like, y'all gotta figure this shit out because this is not right. So Oscar and Lenny stage a fight to fake Lenny's death for everyone to see. It's televised, right? To everyone to see, hey, don't mess with me. Oscar, Lenny's gonna get to fake his death so he doesn't have to perform for his family anymore. And in turn, Oscar still gets to keep his fake phony status, and Lenny can go under the radar and kind of live with everybody who does accept him down at the fish reef, okay? And obviously, Lenny is a shark, so he was in hiding for a period of time, and after this, Lenny is going to pretend and dress up and spray paint himself to look like a dolphin. Okay, so he doesn't look like a shark because obviously the fish are scared of sharks, and he was going to work at the whale wash with Oscar and Angie, okay, because they actually support him and they're just like, no, you're cool, right? Isn't this an interesting thing? They were not like really policing each other, they were just kind of helping each other conform in that way, right? It's very interesting. So, one thing we know is that Lola does not like that Oscar still likes Angie. So she says, I'm gonna go tell John Lino who the real Shark Slayer is, because we're going, who's the Shark Slayer? Who's the Shark Slayer? Guess the TV messaging in the fish reef did not get to the shark. Okay? But she was the messenger, right? And what happens? Angie gets kidnapped, okay? And now Oscar's like, shit, we gotta go save Angie, obviously. This is the thing. Putting a good woman in danger because you can't just be honest. It doesn't sit right with me, guys. It doesn't, and it never will. It never will. So they go to this fight. They try to bluff. They fight it out. Basically, Oscar swims to lead him to the whale wash, in which they get Don Lino in the whale wash holder, right where they hold the whales, and everything comes out, right? Oscar is like, yeah, I lied. Actually, I need to be honest. I lied. I'm not the one who killed your son, right? And actually, if you were wondering where your other son went, I didn't kill your other son either. He's actually right here. He's dressed like a dolphin, right? And we get this. What's your problem? So your son likes kelp. So his best friend's a fish. So he likes to dress like a dolphin. So what? Everybody loves him the way he is. Don't make the same mistake I did. I didn't know what I had until I lost it. Interesting. And for Lenny's story, this is why I say too, it's kind of like a metaphor for him being gay, maybe even a metaphor for him being trans. We could go either way with it, right? This idea that, like, listen, like, Lenny's cool the way he is, right? Like, they, in here, which I said was very interesting, like, Oscar and Lenny weren't pushing each other, placing each other to the status quo. They were simultaneously trying to help each other uphold their image in some way, right? Like for Lenny, he wanted to, for example, like die in dignity under the guise of his father, so his father would stop being on top of him for not fitting the mold, right? And Oscar was chasing this status, right, to be seen as cool, to have the money, to be liked in a way that when he got that, it didn't feel good to him. He still didn't feel better, right? Because this is the lie that patriarchy sets for men, right? We say you can want these things, you want to hit these goals. This is what it looks like to be a man. This is what it looks like to be worth something. And when you really boil it down to it, right? Did he feel good in that? Did Lenny feel good having to go through all of these hoops just to like live freely as himself? or feel like you were worth something, that you had people who supported you, right? Like, this is a lot. We're doing a lot. Oscar already had people who liked him for who he was, right? Like, it's not that Oscar is not already, obviously, a flawed character, right? This is not the part we're arguing, right? But he already had people who cared about him, right? And why wasn't that enough, right? When we look up, the lies that patriarchy tells us and how that affects how we move, right? And that is for everybody, right? Because whilst obviously men benefit from these patriarchal systems, right, they are simultaneously also being harmed by them. And I think that's like something people fail to remember, or it's hard to accept that like people can simultaneously be harmed from the systems they benefit from, even though at the end of the day, everybody is harmed, right? It's important to note both of those things, but people fail to be like, well, it can't harm you because you're benefiting from it. Yes, they're benefiting from it 100%. And if you don't deconstruct that, what does that mean? But simultaneously, like, they are suffering on the inside, right? Because if you were to really sit with yourself and be like, how did I form these ideas? How did these come to be? How did I think of myself? How do I think of other people? And how does the status quo of patriarchy or whatever dial into how I'm viewing myself and others, right? Like, we can really boil down our issues to that, right? And there's so many things under the sun with that, of course. But like, with even with Lenny, right? Like, he just wants to be accepted and he's continuing like, no, that's not me, that's not me, but he's being pushed into that by his father, right? A mold that he will never live up to, and the pressure, right? This is almost like really interesting because even when we talk about being gay, being trans, like, right? Like, forcing people to fit into a mold, right? Like, no, you're my son, right? This like level of like, I'm not going to fully please you in the way that like Don Lino was going to throw Lenny out, right, of the home or of the family business by any means. But what is kind of the torture that Lenny faced internally because his father like would say, "No, I care about you. I want you here, but I only if you conform to the way I want you to be." That's where we get to the point where Lenny wanted to fake his own death. That's actually actually that's so dark. Oh my god. And I'm filming this in Pride Month, mind you. Happy Pride Month to Lenny. Oh my god. He walked. He walked so everybody could run. But oh my god, wow. I'm sorry. I'm just talking about that now and that really fucking hit me. And I think, it's interesting because I talk about Oscar, right? His battle with self-worth. How does the patriarchy tie into that? We tie into Lenny's story. How does the patriarchy tie into that? Right? The status quo patriarchy. How does that harm everybody, right? And how does that harm how we think about ourselves and how we think about other people, right? And the things that we do. And I also say Don Lino when you're talking about a mob boss, a shark, right? Like, these are like maybe pinnacle, like top of a like very masculine, quote unquote thing, um, to kind of reflect the patriarchy of it all. And we are looking at Don Lino, kind of the thing that like people who don't want to accept people as they are, don't want to deconstruct these ideas that we have been taught, because this is all the social construct at the end of the day, right? How do they hurt from this, right? They hurt people by forcing other people to conform, right? In whatever way, shape, or form that may be. And also, they harm themselves, right? Because what are these relationships that we could open ourselves up to if not for this thinking pattern, right? If not for worrying about ourselves and other people, placing them to the status quo, placing ourselves to the status quo, and all the things that encompass it, right? What are the type of relationships we can build with the people that we want to, the people that we love, if we deconstruct these ideas, like, how strong could those relationships be? And that is so interesting, and that is something we tackle in Shark Tale, and it's very a digestible way for kids to understand, right? But if we don't look at how the status quo of patriarchy, right, sets these standards, and obviously we're talking about the guys here, and we'll get into Angie momentarily, but specifically with the men here in the status quo of patriarchy, and what is this idea of masculinity? How do we reach that? What are the things that we have to do, right? And that does, if it doesn't like match with who we are, how does that affect us? If we refuse to really look at that, how can we like really move forward, right? Like, how can we make sustainable change if we refuse to look at how that affects how we have been brought up, right? And how we think. So at the end of the day, Lenny had to learn out to seek places where he would be accepted for who he was, right? Because Don Lino was not creating an environment like that. Don Lino was creating an environment that made his son be like, I would rather run away and fake my death than have to perform here anymore. We don't fucking talk about that. I want to cry. Don Lino had to learn to accept his son for who he is if he wanted a future relationship with him, right? If we refuse to accept, and I always say, even if you're deconstructing things, you may be like, I'm not quite there yet, but I would like to get there. So what do I have to think about to get there? And that is something Don Lino has to do, right? And Oscar had to learn that he is worthy where he is now. He didn't have to do anything to be worthy. He already was. There was not an accomplishment or goal or thing to meet. He had to find that within himself, right? Because the thing is, as much support as you have, like, you have to find that within yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, all you got is you, right? Like, if you can't build that within yourself, how are you going to recognize that in other people? And at the end of the day, patriarchy robs men of the relationships to themselves and other people, right? How did we see the status quo of patriarchy affect every single character in this movie, right? And specifically the men, but I specifically now want to get into Angie because this is something not enough people are talking about. I got one TikTok recently who was saying that, what I'm gonna say, okay? And I was like, yes, finally we're fucking talking about it. So, as you have heard through the episode, I have complained that Angie should not have given the pearl to Oscar, okay? You cannot save these men, right? It's just kind of this idea within patriarchy as far as women go, right? You can love someone, you can teach someone to be better or to care more about themselves. And here's the thing, at the end of the day, that's not true, right? How do we see that happen under patriarchy to women? Our failure to really deal with the discomfort. Discomfort, what do we know discomfort to be? Right to right to comfort is a tenet of white supremacy, right? And this is just all to say that what if we refuse to get comfortable being uncomfortable and challenging ourselves to ask ourselves these real questions? How does that affect the system, right? When we are bold enough to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with people, and saying, no, I don't want to think like this anymore. I want to feel good about myself. I don't want to perpetuate a system that is continually harming everybody in the movie, right? In many different ways. When we say that we're going to tackle that, what does that do to the status quo, right? And who panics when people challenge that, right? There's so much we need to unlearn. Unlearning is the forever thing, right? Because when we have been socialized under these systems, right, there's forever more stuff to unpack to realize, yep, that was misogynistic, that's rooted in patriarchy, that's rooted in capitalism, that's rooted in white supremacy. There's so many things that, like, you will be uncovering till the day you die, because that is just growing as a human and learning things and unpacking the systems that we simultaneously live under today, okay? But it is so important. And the thing about Angie is, it's like, come on, girl, come on, we gotta know better than this. You cannot shape a man into loving himself, right? And you shouldn't have to sacrifice and have yourself be put in danger just to try to help someone realize that, right? I think when I go back to High School Musical, I hope everyone knows that movie by now. But something in High School Musical that I think is so beautiful is that Gabriela Montez was someone who came into Troy's life and, kind of helped create that safe space for him to break the status quo and be who he wanted to be. And the thing of High School Musical, at the end of the day, Troy had to learn on his own, right? Similar to Oscar-ish. That when Gabriella's not there, guess who's there? Troy. And you got to learn to count on yourself, and you got to learn to, like, have the self-worth to be like, no, this is what I want to do. I know everybody's saying this and that, and this is what I should be, but this is what I want to do, right? And I have to not only feel good about that, standing against people who don't want me to do that, but also feel good in my decision and how I view myself, right? But like I said, at the end of the day, in High School Musical, whilst I do love Troy and Gabriella, at the end of the day, Troy had to learn that himself. Oscar had to learn that himself. It was not something that Angie could give him. There was not enough Angie could sacrifice to get there, right? And I think Angie, like, unfortunately, because she knew Oscar, she was just put in danger. But at the end of the movie, guys, we didn't even get to the end of the movie. other than that speech from from Oscar to Don Lino, right? Oscar invests in half of the whale wash, right? So him and his boss Sykes, the pufferfish, co-own the whale wash now. And it's kind of a nod to the beginning of the movie. We're talking about like his father was a tongue scrubber. He puts the picture of his father on his desk, right? Like that is beautiful. Like let's nod to that. I'm not necessarily mad at that, other than the fact that like all this money that Oscar gained from being the fake shark slayer he got to keep, it's worth a question. It's worth a question, guys. Then we get to Angie gets with Oscar. Now, it's a movie, like, of course this shit was gonna happen. You know what I mean? But this is my critique outside of that. I do not think there is a world in which Angie should have gotten together with Oscar. Like I said, yes, Oscar was learning a lesson, da da da, but it's like, why do women have to put up with, oh no, they just have to learn and then like it's fine? Like I don't think like Angie has been put through enough. Like I don't think she has to sacrifice herself so that someone can learn a lesson. And I just think like unlearning it doesn't happen overnight by any means, okay? But it's just like I'm sorry, like this man took your money, bet it on a seahorse, lost it. Okay, yes, he gave it back to her in a necklace, but I don't care. I don't care about that. We can note it, but I don't care about that. But that was disrespectful, right? And then, of course, Angie, by association, gets put in danger, okay? Because we go back to the beginning of the movie where Oscar said, I'm gonna be a nobody. Nobody loves a nobody. And Angie's like, you don't have to be a somebody. You're a somebody here. I just think at the end of the day, okay, like women should not have to just go along with Oscar. Oh, now he finally learned his lesson. Right? Like she has kind of like been the voice of reason in all of this. Obviously, they had Lenny and Oscar had to learn their own lessons. Like as much as they could take advice from Angie, like they have to find that within themselves. But that's just the thing. I just feel like there was so much disrespect at that point. Like and it's not to I don't wanna blame the women because like I said, this happens a lot on TikTok. It's just to really be investigating, the ways that we don't need to sacrifice ourselves, and sometimes you just have to be like, "Okay," you can be like, "I like Oscar, I'm glad he learned his lesson, but I don't think that's right for me." Of course, I'm not Angie, I'm not a fish, I don't live in the shark tail reef, okay? So, it is what it is, but that just didn't sit right with me. I think under patriarchy, there is this thing like I said, you have to wait for the man to finally learn his lesson, to be the right man, to sacrifice. Oh, you can teach him to be a better man. Da, da, da. This is a trope we see in so many movies, and obviously this is a very small portion of it. It's just like a very quick thing at the end of the movie. But like I said, I have to talk about. I always talk about these things. Like I'm just like nah. I'm glad it worked out. And it's not to say how do you view punishment. Like, right, I'm not saying like Oscar needed to face like big consequences, but like, come on, you know? It's just like, should he have even had that money? That's what I'm saying. How did like he was a fake. He was a fake. He was fraud. He was a fraud. And I think everyone should rewatch Shark Tale. And at the end of the day, I think it's great to reflect to how have the systems of patriarchy affected how you view things, how you view yourself, and how you may have accidentally placed other people to the status quo and yourself to the status quo, right? That is something to think about. That is something we talk about in Shark Tale. And my favorite thing now, I would say, from a Shark Tale deep dive, because this is one of the first ones that I did before I started doing the deep dives into all the childhood movies because honestly, I love it. And I talk about High School Musical at nauseum on my personal page, so you can check that out if you'd like to. But the one thing I love about now thinking about it, I rewatched this movie at the end of 2024 before I wrote about it, okay? And honestly, my favorite thing is what I talked about today, Lenny's story. We need to be talking about Lenny's story and just how detrimental it is to when you do not fit into the status quo of what is expected to you, right? Whether you are gay, whether you are trans, what happens, right? In Lenny's case, we didn't get to see a big storyline, right, on it. But Lenny did not feel accepted in his place, and even just in a place where his father like wanted him to be there, but wanted him to fit a certain mold where he just couldn't take it anymore, and he'd rather fake his death than face it. Like we actually need to be fucking talking about that, okay? So happy Pride to everyone out there. Oh my god, that really touched my heart thinking about that now. It's so fucking serious, so y'all better fucking get your head in the game. I love Shark Tale. I think everybody should rewatch personally.